Welcome everybody to this LogPoint presentation on SIEM within local government. We will be running the session for the next hour, and throughout the session, please do leverage the Q&A button inside the Zoom session to ask any questions. We'll try and answer those as we go through, and if there are any left at the end, we'll also have a session at the back end of this presentation just to make sure we answer all the questions. So I'll get stuck in. So again, thank you for joining us today. So today we have myself, Russell Poole, Regional Director for the UK and Ireland for LogPoint. We're also joined by Robin Barlow, who's the Head of Security and Compliance from Strata. So thank you for joining us today, Robin. And lastly, we have Nils, our Technical Lead in the UK from LogPoint, who will be showing a demonstration of the platform a bit later as well. So just a quick overview of the things we're gonna go through today. So first of all, I'll give a very brief overview of the SIEM technology and the SIEM market, and then hand over to Robin, who's gonna actually give us an overview of exactly how he's using the LogPoint technology inside the Strata environment to add value, and we can show you some examples of how he's using that. We then move on to just a brief overview of the LogPoint solution, followed by a product overview and a LogPoint demonstration. And lastly, there will be, as I said, a Q&A session at the end and a wrap up. So I'll get stuck in. So obviously today we're talking about SIEM within the local government environment and how we can leverage this technology to really assist from a security and operations perspective. So just to recap on SIEM and what we're talking about here. So security, incident and event management. Very, very simply, what we're talking about is actually pulling log files from across an environment into a central platform, which allows us to actually convert those log files into a single language, a single taxonomy, if you will, which then actually allows us to actually provide dashboards, reports, and alerts across the entirety of the information across your environments, allowing you clear visibility of what's going on and the tools and the awareness to really drill down into that information to actually understand when things need to be addressed or do any threat hunting and such like as well. If you think about most environments, especially inside local governments, there's usually around about 10 different vendor technologies inside the security infrastructure. And obviously these individual technologies, from firewalls to two-factor authentication to AV to web security, email security, for example, all have their own management consoles, have their own skill sets required to actually access them and actually leverage the information provided, and also have their own ways of actually looking at the actual log files behind them. With a SIEM technology, we're able to pull that into a single platform, which allows us greater visibility, but also allows us to correlate that information together and give us better insights around what's going on. The other challenge we see, especially inside local government, is the actual volumes of data. The actual data log volumes is increasing quite dramatically year on year. When we think about how many connected devices we now have, obviously things like Internet of Things and more machine-to-machine communication is all creating vast volumes of logs, and it's very difficult to really understand what's important and what's relevant so you can react quickly and actually make sure your environment is secure. From a LogPoint perspective, there's three key areas we focus upon. So primarily it's around security. We are a cyber company, and it's around providing that visibility around the security environment. But because we're actually looking at the entirety of the estate, from security to servers and such like as well, and even cloud environments, we're able to pull that together and do some very clever reporting against certain compliance standards. So that could be ISO 27001, it could be PCI, it could be different requirements across your environments. And what we're able to do is actually look at those standards and actually understand exactly what's configuration needs to be in place and check that against those standards, giving you a real good view around what's actually enabled, what gaps there might be, providing auditability, and also providing the right due diligence against these standards to show you're monitoring them on a regular basis. And lastly, LogPoint can actually help in the operations area as well. So LogPoint isn't just restricted on putting log files from security components. It can pull log files from virtually anything. And that could be as simple as actually putting logs from print servers to understand if someone's printed a vast amount of color paper and costing the organization a fortune, to something more complex from ERP systems, even to more kind of operational things that might be unique to that organization. As long as we can get the log files and understand how they're actually built up, convert them, we can pull that information and provide value inside the LogPoint platform. So just focusing on security here. So obviously we're talking about centralized analysis, this single pane of glass to actually give you those viewpoints, the visibility, but also the ability to really drill into that information, do your analysis, do your investigation. Inside the UK market, we have around about a 2.5 month time between a breach actually happening on a network and someone detecting that something's going on. That's on average scale inside the UK market. Obviously, that's a very long time for someone to be inside that environment, maybe disrupting, maybe actually taking information outside that to third parties. And these technologies, like LogPoint, all are there to actually remove that or reduce that time frame down from months down to days and hours and minutes, really, and give that visibility. And obviously, with GDPR now, we have this 72-hour window, whereby if we actually detect a breach, we need to be able to actually, one, understand that we've actually, something's going on network, understand what it is, understand what's been affected, and actually understand what we're going to do about that. So we can then report that to the ICO, report that to internal or external stakeholders. And if you think about this dispersed environment with lots of silo technologies around it, to meet that 72-hour window can be very challenging sometimes. And a product like LogPoint really helps to pull that together and ensure these timeframes can be addressed. The other thing I'd say around any technology, especially security technology, is it's only ever going to be as powerful as the configuration contained on it. So there's a few things we do around with LogPoints to actually really address this. So first of all, out the box, LogPoint has over 430 different technologies it automatically connects to or can connect to with configuration. But with those connections comes all the dashboards, reports, and alerts that align to that specific technology. It makes it extremely quick to get the solution up and running, but it's also very easy to align these pre-built dashboards, reports, and alerts to your environment, to tweak them, to join them together, to make them relevant in a very short time frame, and ensure that this solution meets your needs now and in the future. But even with this, there's always going to be those things that you just don't know to look for. These unknown unknowns in your environments. And when they always see lots of different attacks, targeted attacks, these slow and low attacks, things that are actually maybe we wouldn't know to look for, zero-day attacks and such like. And that's why we released our UEBA module for LogPoint, or User and Entity Behavior Analytics. And this is based on some very clever machine learning, running some complex algorithms in the background to really give us an insight on what's normal for your users and machines. What do they do on a day-to-day basis? How do they access your environments? How do they traverse your network? What kind of servers do they use? How do they communicate internally and externally? And once we understand that normal, it's then very simple to then understand when things are abnormal. And that could be someone logging in at 4 a.m. in the morning. It could be someone accessing a server they haven't before, or uploading a certain amount of data which you wouldn't expect them to do. Now, each one of those in their own right maybe doesn't justify an alert. It could be someone couldn't sleep. But when we add these components together, we actually see that there's actually a pattern that could actually be indicative of a threat. And what we do for each of these instances, we just leverage and increase a risk score aligned to that user or machine until we hit a threshold and we can alert against these unusual activities. It can be very, very powerful. So just with that, I'd like to hand over to Robin, and Robin's going to give us a brief overview of how he's leveraging the LogPoint technology inside Strata at the moment. So I'll hand over to you, Robin.
Thanks, you, Russ. Yes, so I'm Robin Barlow. I'm the, for a great title, Head of Security Compliance. I've been working in the IT industry for 30 years. A lot of that has been along the security lines, and actually been working in local authorities for the last 20 years. So I'm well versed in types of constraints we generally get in this part of the industry. Strata itself is made up of 3 different councils, so it's effectively been the IT from the 3. So a quick overview of really what we are. So effectively, we've been going since 2014. We've got about 75 employees, 1,800 users. We brought these 3 councils together. We're the original team from those. One of my challenges is that we use virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI. which has its benefits, but also is quite a complex beastie. And at times I call it a princess, because there's so many little bits that if it finds that aren't quite right, it will kick out. I've got my team, which is a security compliance team, which is a quick slide in a moment on that. And I think LogPoint was implemented about 2016. So we've been with LogPoint for quite a few years now. And for me, I'm one of these sad people who actually quite likes log management. I use the old Kiwi syslog tool, which some of you may remember if you've actually been using this type of tool for a while. And also somebody who likes monitoring systems anyway. So it's a natural fit for me that I tend to actually run the product within the organization. And it's very much for me, as Russ was saying there, I get on my little box at times saying, this isn't just a security tool. If you're going to invest in a tool like this, you really want to be using it for a wide range of things. And you'll see in a few minutes the range of things we're doing with it. I wouldn't say we're a type of leading, that we've got the greatest use of LogPoint. We use the bits we need to use of it, and there's a huge depth to the actual product, as Russ will naturally tell you, and because there is. But you don't need to take the whole lot on in one go. Build up to it is one of my type of comments I'd have to say. Pick up the key things you need to, but also try other things that maybe not actually in the product, and that's one of the great things with this tool. Okay, so very quickly, and I'm not going to go through this, but so effectively I've got 4 in my team. I'm the one at the bottom there. As you can see, LogPoint's one of my little bits. If you're in the similar types of organizations, no doubt you're also having to cover quite a range of different things. So why did we go for LogPoint? Well, as I say, I've used things like Kiwi syslog. We've seen some of the type of products that come in where you can, in terms of penetration testing, and a number of those try to get into this market, and they said, yes, we can all do log management. And what I found with all those tools is that log management to them is a product that can store the logs. You can point it at it, but actually if you want to do anything with those logs, it's a real challenge. It's effectively get out your notepads, etc., try and search through huge text files, trying to find that. And that just doesn't work. It might have worked many years ago when we didn't have many computers, but nowadays the immense amount of logs that come in. So it's really relied on technology moving on in the last few years that you can actually really work with this range of logs and turn it into something that we can work with and just pull out those few bits that we really need. So for me, the cost model of LogPoint was the defining area in a lot of ways. There were too many products out there which were going to charge by the volume of logs coming in. Great for some. I don't have the budgets to do that. I need to know from a council perspective how much I'm likely to be liable for as such for the product over a certain time. And I also didn't want to be constrained. And when you look at some of the other products, they do focus purely on the security. Because they're log levels, you wouldn't be able to use it for the operational side as well without actually having quite a cost to it, and probably needing a fair amount of extra support because they don't want to support all the other bits. They're focusing on the security market. LogPoint doesn't do that for me. I've got a wide range. They're not arrogant as well. I did find that. So I've gone through some of the other suppliers and they've come in and it's though they were know-it-alls, and that's what I didn't want. I wanted somebody I can work with, so I found LogPoint very easy to work with. Log definitions, yes, as Russ said, there's a huge number of log definitions that are already out there to actually process the logs that come into a format that you can then report out of. But also, we've all got odd environments, things that aren't covered. What I don't want to be doing is always having to go back to the supplier and saying, I've got these different devices, could you please do this? They will do that for you, and that's fine. But actually, sometimes you need to be a bit more nimble than that, and when you've got a particular need, and you can do your own definitions. And I've done a lot of those for some of our odd sources. And in the days when I went for LogPoint, and it still is because of where we are with Gartner now, it was a company on the up and a point to prove. And I think that's key. I'm looking for somebody who's hungry rather than somebody who's already there and just effectively you could call it milking at that point. So I've been in the industry long enough, so I can probably say that. So this is just my main dashboard in terms of the product itself. I just mainly throw it there because if you look at the bottom left one, you can see the messages per second. So I'm running at times 3,500, 4,000 logs per second at times into this product. And if you think of the cost of that for some of the products out there, that would be a phenomenal amount. You also get peaks. I don't know quite why there was a peak of 16,000. It might have been because the something was rebooted somewhere. But again, it just handles that. And at the moment, I've got a reasonably large box. It cost about 7,000 to build all the hardware for this. But as you can see at the moment, it's got 256 gig of RAM, which has become so much cheaper nowadays. And it's easily handling that load. Look at this, it's hardly getting to 20% at the moment. So get the right equipment behind it and you can really make this system work. So just a little bit about, what does it mean to actually manage LogPoint? And for me, as you can see, it's just my team. I'm the main person who does that. I've got somebody else who tends to do the hardware elements of it, but you don't need many people doing it. You do need to spend the time, though, to actually build up the rules and decide which bits of the product that are already provided by LogPoint are going to be of use to you, which bits you wish to change, and this thing called the normalization, which is where you've got your own odd, weird logs that you then also want to bring in. It is time, but it's well worth the investment, and there's no way now that any of my colleagues, because I'm one of the managers who run Strata, the other colleagues would not now say get rid of LogPoint. They use the reports, and that's, I think, a sign of when something actually is really being useful now. I also like something called PRTG. You might have come across, and I've done a degree of integration with that because they both got pluses and minuses, so why not? I don't do anything particularly clever. Most of my alerts come out by email. As I say, the other teams use it. I tend to use NXLog to bring in a lot of my logs, which is one of the things that you get the enterprise version that comes with LogPoint anyway. And yes, I've been trying to get to the point of getting a trial of UEBA, but that's down to me and my time rather than anything to do with LogPoint. And if anybody's not seen PRTG, this is effectively the types of things that you can graphically do with PRTG, but the difference here is I actually can feed stuff into PRTG and I actually take stuff out of PRTG. So I use PRTG as my network monitoring tool for all my infrastructure, and a couple of graphs there showing my VDU CPU use, for example, over time, etc. So that's one of my big dashboards just for actually keeping on track of the VDI and all our infrastructure. So what type of things do I do? So one of the things I was saying, let's look at the security, the SIEM version first. So I do all the normal things. You've got a whole load of reports already into the system, but it is so easy actually to build your own up. Once you use the searching criteria and do a search, you can then turn it into alert, or you can turn it into a report, and those can then be emailed, or they can do SNMP traps, or even update a web service. There's lots of things you can do with this information. But normal stuff then, so failed Active Directory, security, two-factor access, you set thresholds. Obviously, I don't want to know when somebody just hasn't managed to log in properly, but I do need to know if I'm getting a high volume of those coming through. Again, they come through to my team. We just triage them as they come in. And if there's anything that's looking interesting, obviously we'll go into that. As normal, you would expect these types of tools, firewalls, lots of different rules on that in terms of what could be coming in. Web server logs, you can feed both Apache, IIS, I'm sure a whole range of them. They're text files at the end of the day. If it's a text file, it's very, very easy to get it into this product. You don't need something that actually only sends in syslogs or SNMP. AV logs, of course. The types of things where if you're going to have privilege escalation, lateral movement, that's the thing where you would start seeing some of your admin passwords starting to change, for example, potentially. So I've got alerts on that. So I always know when any of the admin passwords have been reset, changed, modified, etc. And I've got one on RDP, and I've got a whole range of different ones. So this is just a selection, and this is what it might come through. So I say keep it simple in a lot of ways. So here's one, admin password reset. I was just saying, sorry, all the bits have been blurred out, but that's what you get through. In this case, we were tidying up our whole load of admin passwords. So that's why there was quite a load there. Don't normally see these reports coming through, but I like to know, and I want to know when somebody is changing an admin password. This wasn't overly useful to me. I don't know if anybody would recognize that. That actually is from our firewall, and that was the WannaCry event of, what was it, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago? No, good 2 years, I think. So that's WannaCry seen from our firewall. In this case, our firewall's a Fortinet, so it did its own geolocation to say where effectively attacks SNMB scans were coming from. LogPoint could also have done that. I just used the firewall's own geolocation. It was a great, pretty picture. What it did do, though, when you're trying to show what you're doing in the security, and it's for the wrong reasons to a degree, that was sent out to the councillors, and they went, wow, you really are on top of your security. That's amazing. So you can do that. You can produce some great charts out of this just to try and show, in maybe not the right ways, but sometimes we just have to sell these products into our business because they can't see the magic that's happening in the background. And this was just one of those wow events for them. And that's why I keep that one. This one also went onto SIS a while ago as well, just because it's of general interest. That's the security. I don't want to down the security side, but I really am a fervent believer that you need to look at this tool for the wider range of things. And some of these have a cross between the operation and security anyway. So, for example, yes, all the email and the web filtering systems, we happen to use ClearSwift and we use Mimecast. They've got great consoles. You can get information out of them. But actually, if you're trying to do something a bit clever with them, you'll soon find that they didn't do that report and you can't do that. So we bring all those logs into LogPoint so we can look and focus on particular failures. I've got a thing at the moment on the Office 365, which we find it's good old TLS failures. But we can just do so much more by bringing this information actually into LogPoint. Then we look at things like our VMware. I told you earlier on about the Princess, the VDI environment, or what we call the global desktop, because VDI sounds like it's something you shouldn't be catching. And from a VMware perspective, it is the largest generator of logs. Our whole environment is based around VMware. We are talking millions of logs per hour, if not more. Actually, I can't think of it. Now, I'm not interested in most of those logs, but if you try and, as one of the techies, try and access the VMware logs from the normal tools, it's a pain in the backside. It's more than that. Therefore, we've actually found that we can better process these logs through LogPoint and give them what they want and find those tiny little bits, which are the indicators that we've got something that's coming up and that we need to get on top of now before it becomes a major down for all the councils. Because if our environment goes down once, actually 3 councils go down. So we're very aware of that we've got 3 sets of politicians as well. Windows, of course, has got a whole lot of indicated logs in there of issues. So we track all of those. We can go back if we want to. When we do have something that goes wrong, we then go back. Could we have identified that in our logs? It's just a good process to get into. Audits, log-in, log-out events. Because we're VDI, we don't have the ability to have the underlying event logs from the machines. Somebody says who logged in, who logged out. So we get that information from the VMware logs instead. Firewall reporting, yes, but it's not just about the incidents. It's about, like Zoom at the moment. We're on Zoom at the moment. Zoom's a big issue for some of us councillors at the moment. And because of the way it does things, we want to know who's trying to use Zoom. I can get that now via this tool. And just events and changes to the config. Yeah, I want to know when somebody's playing around with that. So this is nothing to do with LogPoint. This is the one to do with LogPoint. We get this type of information from Mimecast, but actually, this is one of the dashboards that you can actually get out of LogPoint. And again, I can choose what I want to get, and I can get a lot more information than I can generally out of what Mimecast has decided I should be able to see. So I use this one, but I also have other ones, and I also bring other events out of Mimecast. And this is the type of event I get for, in this case, Office 365. What we find with Office 365 as we partially use it is that it's if it spots somebody else on Office 365, it will sometimes try and go around your filtering you've got in place. And we've spotted a few of these, and obviously we try and close those doors. And this is one we're currently getting through. And it appears that if you do a reset of Office 365, it sends it directly internally rather than the outside route. I've not got an issue with that, but it's just one of those where when we're in security, we're trying to identify oddities, what's different, what's wrong. And this is one of those that I just keep on top of it in case somebody opens up something they shouldn't do. Okay, last of the slides in terms of this. So operational tools, another set of things we do. Network switches, you can send all your logs from the network switches into it very easily. We had problems a while ago where different technologies didn't work well together. Sometimes we got a storm, which created because the topology, so the way it thought all the links were connected, it thought changed. That created a storm, that created downtime. So we see that bubbling now. So we by having reports to warn us about that. Just looking after LogPoint itself. LogPoint, you don't just throw everything at LogPoint. You actually say, I want to receive stuff from that device and that device and that device. So, because each one of those, you might want to set up your own configuration, how you deal with that. So you want to know, and sometimes I'll know that I've got some firewall changes that are going ahead by the technical team, but they don't tell me exactly when that's going to happen. So I just say, fine, just point it at this. When they start the first log events coming through, I then get an email saying this device is trying to talk to LogPoint, and therefore I can go and investigate that and normally just let it in, but also set it up in the right way. In this connection to PRTG, so I say that system is great, but what it's not good at doing is telling you when something is changing. Again, you always get the old things happening, but if it's changing a lot, then that's something you want to look at. What they often call is flapping. And because everything comes into LogPoint now, I can actually say if there's a certain number of changes for over a certain time frame, highlight that one to me so I can look into it. And that's my main thing I look at, because I get a huge amount of individual reports coming out of PRTG because it is quite verbose at times. But this lets me get on top of that information and find the bits I need to. Mass user connection dropouts, I've got to just slide on what that looks like. But we've got, especially at this point in time, so we've got about 1,100 people all the time working off-site now. We've got very few actually working in the locations any longer. So it's even more important to us to know whether there are underlying issues somewhere. Virgin Media was something that went down a week or so ago, which caused me some other issues. But we need to know, because if we're aware of them, then we're ready for the phone calls to come, and we're already on top of it before we actually start getting the calls. So very much use that. Rebooted reset devices, I'll show you that in a minute. And DNS reviews, I cover that one. It could be in the security bit, but actually what we found when we do our DNS reviews using this is that we actually find there's a whole really bad piece of configuration over time has built up where certain programs, certain servers are talking to maybe servers that disappeared years ago, but you don't know about it. And they're obviously trying for these, and technically it's wasting bandwidth, wasting time, and probably actually erroring in certain places. So we've been able to identify a whole load of configuration items that just need to be resolved over time. What you've seen so far is I've been using the email route to give me alerts that are coming through. The alternative is to actually use the reporting functionality out of LogPoint, and you can choose what interval that is. In this particular case, it's a report that's produced every 24 hours. You can do it by hour, you can do it by weeks, and I've got one that runs over a month, just a different types of thing. So that's what you would get through, brings out a PDF, an Excel spreadsheet, or a Word document. And in this particular case, this is coming straight out of PRTG, and whether it's some form of response that hasn't come through from something, or it's the system uptimes I tend to monitor on this. If you've got a system problem next day and you think, oh, what's changed? One of the things that the guys can do is they go to the report to find out what has changed in terms of, has there been a reboot? Has it been a Windows update that's actually gone through? So they use this report just to give them a quick eyeball of what's happening. And also sometimes wonder if one of your suppliers has been in. Now we have a very specific route, so it all has to be logged properly, but people soon forget in terms of who did something the day before. So we also track who's logging on and off to the environment to give you that going, so they logged on yesterday, it's not working today. Therefore, I think the very first point of call is to find out what they did yesterday. So again, using this operationally to keep ahead, just to keep on top of what you're doing. And I think it's the last slide. And this is just what we get, where if we get a high level of what we call global desktop disconnects. And this is one of those you really don't want to see too often, because if you see this one, you know you've lost a whole load of users. So the phones will be going hot very quickly. And you're also then having to quickly identify, is it something to do with the princess and all the different bits that make up a VDI environment? Or is it something to do with the internet connections? Or is it actually a complete service provider, as we've had with Virgin Media in the last couple of weeks? That goes to the service desk, that goes to the infrastructure team. So again, they can try and get on top of this before anything, well, it's happened by then, but they can get on top of it and try and get it back as fast as possible, because effectively this is potentially council down at that point, or 3 councils down. And the list there, this was just a blip we had one morning. This was again a Virgin Media one, and it all obviously impacted all 3 councils at that point. Okay, that was trying to keep that relatively short. So hopefully you've got a little bit out of that. Obviously, if there's any questions, I'm quite a believer in not just LogPoint, but this whole area. So I'm a relative enthusiast. So very happy whenever you want to do this, to take questions. And obviously you've got my contact details as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Really, really useful. Hopefully that shows some good insights into how you can use this solution from a security perspective, also from an operational perspective as well. So thank you so much for that, Robin. So let me just drill back into this and just give you a quick high-level overview of LogPoint and why we think we are different from some of the other technologies you might see in this area. So first of all, around LogPoint as an organization. So the business as it stands, we are around about 12 years old as a technology, and we focus solely on the SIEM markets. So this is what we do, and this is what we pride ourselves on, really. We are, obviously, as you expect, on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We are the only solution that is also EAL3+ certified as well, which is not obviously a requirement for local governments, but does give you those assurances that we've gone through some very lengthy and detailed analysis and certification to prove that we develop and maintain our security in a secure manner as well. Our customers tend to love the solution, and we very rarely lose a customer from the LogPoint platform. And as you can probably imagine, we have offices across the globe, but we do focus on Europe. So we are a European company headquartered out of Copenhagen, and the European market is our primary focus. So very local to here, and obviously we have offices in the UK as well. I guess the biggest point of this slide for me is the top left-hand corner. We say advanced modern SIEM. What we really think about here is the way that SIEM is actually addressed. If you look at the perception of SIEM from a lot of people, it's actually got quite a bad name for itself. It's seen as very, very expensive, very time consuming to actually get installed, sometimes taking months and if not years to get operational. And then once you actually got it up and running, you need dedicated resource with some very specialized expertise to actually get the most from the solution. So LogPoint's been built from the ground up really to address those three things. So it's very, very commercially viable and very predictable. It's extremely quick time to value, and it's very, very intuitive to use. And as we saw from Robin, it just fits into your day-to-day operations team, your security team. It's a tool that adds value rather than adds overhead, and it really does prove itself. We mentioned Gartner. There is also, if you are looking at this kind of technology, we do recommend you look at the Gartner Peer Insights review, which is based on basically customers giving their recommendations and their views on the actual investments they've made. So like a TripAdvisor, if you like, of Gartner. LogPoint does feature quite highly on this. I think we're actually on 4.7 now. But as I said, our customers tend to really like the solution and like the capabilities. And again, this is proven, and we can share these, and they're available from our website. There is a couple of reports from Infotech on the market, again based on customer reviews. This one's based on some key tests that they performed with certain users of the solutions around what is expected from SIEM. And LogPoint came out by far the leader in many of these fields, an overall leader in this as well. So I mentioned quick time to value. So again, one of the things we pride ourselves on. So one of the things, when someone purchases LogPoint, we do recommend a core SIEM installation pack. And that's a pre-configured consultancy engagement to actually make sure that we work with you to actually get the LogPoint environment installed and make sure that not only is it operational, but we actually give you the right knowledge transfer to ensure you know how to use the solution. And at the end of this, we actually get our support team to actually onboard you to our support capabilities. And that support team is really there to support you. And this is all about making sure that we don't just come and install a solution, we ensure you have a solution that's actually fit for purpose and that you know how to use. And lastly, that you have a support arm around you should you have any questions. They can be anything from how do I modify this search, how do I create this dashboard and such like. Our support function is not just there to deal with any potential problems you might have. They're there to actually help you get the most from your investment. And lastly, I mentioned the pricing model. So if you look at the market around SIEM, in the most cases, you'll come across a licensing model based on a thing called EPS, or events per second. And what this means is the more data you send to your SIEM solution, the more costly it becomes. And as you can probably imagine, as time increases, log files are only going one way, and these solutions tend to get more and more expensive year on year. Plus, it's very, very hard to predict how much that's going to be, because it's very hard to know how much your log files are going to increase during a certain time period. So LogPoint's been built, again, very differently. So we license our product based on node counts, where a node is a machine that sends log files to LogPoint SIEM. That's extremely predictable, and it's also very easy to understand how that might potentially grow over time, because it's around how many more machines you might have and such like. And we also have a concept of light nodes. So those things that maybe don't produce a vast amount of logs, like desktops and switches, are actually licensed on a 10-to-1 ratio against a full node as well. And this makes it, as we say, we believe, a very, very cost-effective solution. But for local government, we have something specifically unique for this, these organisations. So around about 6 months ago, we looked around certain verticals inside the public sector and really try to understand where would we fit best. Where does the LogPoint technology really align, and where can we actually make this commercially as attractive as possible to fit in with the actual budget restraints and such like we were seeing in certain industries. So local government, one of these. So what we've actually provided is an unrestricted enterprise license for local governments. And what this means is it is fully unrestricted. There is no limitation on the amount of nodes, no limitation on the amount of data and such like for the core SIEM solution. It means you can install it and you'll know that there won't be any increase in costs over the license term or license subscription. And you can actually leverage it for everything you might be thinking of using it for, but also things that you might not have thought about using it for. Some test networks and things like that, which maybe would not be able to justify the cost before, you can leverage this technology in there as well. We've also tried to align a special price list for local governments that actually means something to them. So rather than doing it on a node-based license, we've actually done it on residents with a price of 10 pence per resident, and set some thresholds with a base cost of 20,000 per year and an upper threshold of 50,000 per year. And again, if you're interested, we can actually get a proposal written up around that, so you can actually see the costs aligned to that. So just to reiterate the key principles of LogPoint, I guess. So simplification, make it cost effective, make it very, very quick time to value, make it intuitive to use. No data limits, and again, it really is a unlimited license for local governments. So make sure that you can actually get the most out of your solution, and it's predictable, and you can leverage it without any unexpected costs. And world-class support, we truly believe this. Our support team, as I said, are there to assist. They're there to make sure you get the most out of your investments. And there's someone able to assist you and guide you through any questions you may have. So I hope that gives a good overview. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pass over to Nils, who will give us a quick overview of the architecture, then dive into a demo. But again, if there are any questions, please just link them into the QA button, and we can answer those as we go along as well. Thank you.
Okay, I've shared my screen. I hope you can see that all right. There's a few more slides that I wanted to take you through in terms of how the product is architected and how you might choose to deploy it. And then I will hopefully have enough time to dive into the demo. Robin's already mentioned quite a few great use cases, so I just wanted to show you how that actually looks in action. So in terms of architecture, the most common question that we normally get is, how do I actually run it, and what is it? And it is really a software product that is under your control. I think that's the key thing. And it can be deployed in lots of different ways. Traditionally, it might have been physical hardware that you install it on, but most commonly nowadays it's deployed as a complete image, either through VMware and Hyper-V, something like that, or indeed some customers deploy it in the cloud, just clone an image across an AWS or Azure, or a combination thereof. And that's really one of the key things. LogPoint is kind of flexible in how you deploy it and where you want to put it. And what it does is really take the data on the left. It then goes through various stages that all happen within one or more LogPoint boxes. And at the end, you get the use out of it, as Robin has described, which is either in the security area, it's IT operations, and it can be even business analytics if there are certain business platforms that you feed into LogPoint. Ultimately, it's just a big data platform that you can use to visualize data, alert on, and run analytics through. That yellow box in the middle is the core LogPoint component, that single image that you might deploy. But you can scale that horizontally. These roles that you see there that I'll touch upon briefly, normalization, storage, and analytics, can all be collapsed in one box, which is where a lot of customers start. But you can also deploy multiple ones of those, especially if you have complicated network infrastructures. You might put a collector out in the DMZ that connects back to base. That's all built into LogPoint. There's crucially no dependencies on any operating systems that you need to deploy, no databases that you need to install and administrate. It's all one image, and it gets updated through one package when that becomes available. So going through those different stages, the sources is a key decision that customers need to make, and Robin's touched upon that. There's a whole variety of sources that we have integration built for. You see some of those in the back. Hopefully you'll find some of your vendors on there. That's not even the entire list of sources. It's in all sorts of areas. So I'll come back to that during the demo as what makes sense. But if there is something that you use and that we haven't got support for, then you can raise that as a support ticket with us at no extra cost. So as long as it's a commercial product that other people might benefit from, you can send us examples of those logs and say it would be really useful to have that in LogPoint, and then we will build that for you. So that's kind of the first stage. Obviously, you need to configure your sources to send data to LogPoint. There's lots of different ways of doing that. Once that data arrives, that's where some of the magic happens. So we get that log stream either through a file, through syslog, through Windows event forwarding, whatever else it might be. And then we look at those log messages and translate them into the LogPoint language. And that ensures that no matter where your log comes from, whether that's a Palo Alto firewall or a Windows event log, in the end, the fields in LogPoint are identical. And that makes it then much easier to search through all of your estate and to create correlations between different log sources. You can also add information that isn't originally there. I touched upon that in the demo, and then route that to store it in a LogPoint storage node, which then handles your retention. And that is another key decision when it comes to deciding how much resource investment do you need to make, how long do you want to store your data for, and maybe on what storage medium. As long as it's disk storage, kind of file system based, you can use it with LogPoint. For example, you could mount storage from a cheap NAS device, and LogPoint would automatically tier the log data onto those after a certain time period is hit. So that's all built in. That's pretty much it. Then obviously the last stage is what do you do with all that information? And that's really where the demo comes in. So rather than talk about it theoretically, I can show you in practice. Let me just switch to that. Hopefully you can see that all right. So you've seen glimpses of that in Robin's screenshots. There's several key areas to pretty much any SIEM. So you can see them at the top here. Firstly, there's dashboards. Then there's the search against the data underneath. There's reporting, and then there's incidents and alerting. That's really all there is in terms of key functionality, but obviously there's a lot behind the scenes that you can dive into if you want to make it your own. So what you see here is the dashboard view, and you'll see quite a lot of dashboards. They're largely there for demo purposes. Most customers wouldn't have as many as these. They might have one big dashboard that genuinely is on a big screen somewhere, and then it shows them the key indicators that they are interested in. And that's really the decision that only you can make. Which direction do you want to take the product in? So this is a very common use case. That is the source of data that we almost always want to have in a LogPoint, and that's Active Directory authentication. You can look at that from both an Active Directory perspective, in which case it comes out of your domain controllers, or even on individual machine basis, if you have login events, Kerberos tickets, and so on, maybe a local account that doesn't show up in Active Directory, that's also an interesting event source. So here you can get an overview about which users are logging in, who is failing to log in, who's locking themselves out. That is both of interest operationally, like Robin explained, maybe something's going on where people, for whatever reason, keep forgetting their passwords. You want to know about that. But also, that's where a dashboard is a high-level overview. You can see how over time this might be evolving. This is fairly static in the demo environment, but if there's a massive spike at some point, that could be something more sinister going on, and you might want to see that just on a kind of dashboard level. So authentication in all its form is a very useful data source for operations and for security. The second big area of source data is networking, firewall data, web proxies, VPNs, all those kind of things. And this is a very generic dashboard. Depending on the device you use, it might be more specific. But crucially, again, it comes with LogPoint, and this is something that would work against all firewalls because of that normalization of the logs. So it's just the sources into that connection, where they're coming from, where they're going to. Is there any configuration changes maybe happening in your firewalls that you need to know about? And maybe also something like this, which might be a PCI requirement. Is there communication that's attempted between like this 10 dot something zone and kind of this zone here that shouldn't even be tried, or maybe is successful and you want to monitor it that way? So that's the nice thing about a SIEM. You have these log messages coming from all sorts of sources. And it might well be that you think it's going well and your firewall is blocking this, but then there's logs that appear in a different place where you can tell that traffic is going a completely different route. So it's always good to have these kind of sensors out there to see, is there anything happening that I didn't expect? And you can take that a level further if you really want to dive down into the security area by looking at something like this, which is, again, taking all those logs that you might be collecting, but then cross-referencing that with lists that we might bring in from an external source, such as, you can see some examples here. Critical Stack is a free source of indicators compromise, Proofpoint, and recorded futures cost money. Obviously, they claim they're much better. So it's up to you to decide what sources you might bring in, but what you get is lists of known IP addresses or known hashes or known domain names that people know are up to no good. So why, if we have all that LogPoint data, don't we run that against those lists? So every time we see a source IP or a destination IP, we just go through that list and make sure that that's not something that has been seen before and is known to be bad. And if it is, then maybe you want to be notified about that. But crucially here, you get a visualization of that, maybe where it's coming from and going to, and what the categories are. And that's really the kind of direction that you can take this in. There's a lot of other sources, processes starting and terminating through sysmon on Windows, for example, is an interesting one. There's a whole attack frameworks that we have alerts that are aligned to it, that you can maybe spot these things that are indications of someone performing reconnaissance against your network and so on. And that's where any kind of security tool that creates log data could be really useful. So something like Nessus, for example, is a vulnerability scanner. It's great log data to have. It's not something that we do because we're just a SIEM, but if we have that information, we can cross-reference this with other things, maybe make our alerts better and so on. One thing that I wanted to share is all these widgets, as we call them, are essentially searches against the platform. So you can make changes to them. You can obviously rearrange them and change how they look, but you can also make changes to what they actually visualize. You can build them from scratch, but because it's all pre-built, you can use this to really dive deeper. And that's how you then make this your own. And one thing that I particularly like is something called search templates, which is like a dashboard, but it gives you more control over the results that you're getting back, and they can be completely customized. So if we look at something like this threat hunting template, this is taking information from a lot of different sources. And that's why you have these different widgets. And also on the right-hand side, you can see some control over it that you might have. So if you hit update on that at first, it comes back with everything, which it looks quite overwhelming. But what normally happens is that people want to see something specific. So maybe in this case, they want to know what Christopher has been up to. So they can fill that in, hit update, and it now drills that down and brings that back just for Christopher. You can see what workstation he's been working from and what the messages from the Windows logs we got back. In this case, has he communicated with any of these IPs that we know about and I've spoken about? And even the email traffic could be in here, depending on the logs that you ingest. So this can be useful in all sorts of ways. Maybe you want to find out what's been happening to your Active Directory groups, who's been removing users from that, or you're logging file access and you want to know who's changed directories and deleted files in there. All of that can be done through just logs, and then these search templates which you might be able to share with people that don't even know there's LogPoint underneath. All they need is the kind of 3-4 things they need to do on a daily basis, and then they have some control over it. So maybe your HR team needs to check that a user account was disabled at the end of employment. That would be a way that they can self-service rather than having to raise tickets and the whole IT team being involved. So hopefully that is one way in which you can save a lot of time that you can then spend on things that are more useful, such as looking into incidents and investigations and so on. Speaking of incidents, this is where alerts go. So far we've looked at interactive searches, we've looked at dashboards and the visualizations you're getting, but as Robin had good examples of, maybe you're not looking in LogPoint every Monday morning, you just want to know when something happens. And there's an incident management in LogPoint. Some people also use it externally through email notifications. And they are, again, just searches. So whenever we find something in the platform, we look at the log message, and then we can create an alert on that basis and say, okay, this has just happened. You need to look at that. Each incident always has the data available, so you can dive straight into the log message and see what's going on in there. You can also click on this incident data and you get a rundown like this that's completely configurable to see, okay, so this is description doc from this source address that triggered this. And that can also go externally in emails and so on. So again, there's a lot of alerts pre-built. I wouldn't suggest turning them all on because you probably have a lot of false positives, or they don't make sense in your environment. So look at those pre-built alerts and use them as a starting point for something that might really be of interest to you, and you can customize those. And then last but not least, I just wanted to quickly dive into UEBA, which is the machine learning on top. So everything you've seen so far is part of the core license. That's pretty much the only one we have. And then UEBA is the second license on top. And with that, we take all of that log data, and you can see the millions of events that we hold in the platform, and we encrypt them on premise with a key that only your box holds, and upload that encrypted data to our cloud for analysis. And that creates a baseline of behavior without knowing what the entities are or the users are, and sends that back so it can be visualized. So what happens is that you get a baseline over a specific period of time, what's normal and how far do certain things deviate from that baseline. And that's really the difference to those alerts that I've mentioned so far, where it's a rule that says, this happens, let me know. In this case, it's how different is it and do we think it's risky, which is very useful because it's something that you don't have to define in advance. So if we look at what that means, you get a timeline of a period of time, and you can see there's certain activity at certain times of things that is risky behavior or not risky behavior. There's certain risk scores assigned in this case to the users, but it could also be for servers, where you can see there's one user that has a high risk score. You can filter on that and see what it was that led those models to assume this is a high risk score. That risk score is computed by the machine learning. That means it's quite far removed from what that user usually does. And one example here is that it's the time they work in. It's not something that you can set an alert for because it's different for every user, and you'd also probably not even think about it. And if you did, you'd get false positives all the time because people go on holiday and work from home and so on. So Joshua is actually one of those unusual users that normally works quite late. So any alert between 9 and 5:30 or something like that would never work. But for him, it's unusual that he works in that time. And on its own, that's just a tiny little breadcrumb. And that's how attacks nowadays happen. It's multiple things in multiple places that no one really sees coming. They're low and slow. And it's not as simple as your perimeter has been breached, firewall port communication, let me know. So that's where UEBA can be really useful. So that then gets combined with something else happening at the same time, completely different log source. That's the strength of a SIEM, comes from a web proxy, maybe even a completely different log mechanism. Joshua sent a lot of data using a post request, which is a very unusual way of sending that data. So the highest he would normally do is something like 30 meg. He sent 1.3 gigs. So that's really unusual. And all of that conspires to this high risk rating for this user based on things that you might have never really noticed because this is so fluid. You can't set a threshold on that because you don't even know where to peg it. So UBA is a really useful extra tool on top of your SIEM to highlight those areas that you might not know about And then you can use that to either alert on just with the regular infrastructure of LogPoint, or to enrich the information that you have in your logs to give you a bit more context as to what that means. Who is that user doing it? Is that unusual for that user to do that? And that's how the two really fit together. So I appreciate that was fairly short, but I did want to leave some time for questions at the end. And obviously, we're always available if you have more detailed questions.
If anyone has any questions, please just put them into the Q&A section here. We've got a couple already, but if there's anything else you would like to know, please do ask. And thank you very much, Nils, for your overview. Hopefully everyone found that useful as well. So as I said, we've got a couple of questions here. First of all, around the resident pricing for local governments, what does this refer to? So basically, what we've actually leveraged the actual statistics off some publicly available information on the amount of residents aligned to things like county councils, London boroughs and such like, and leverage that to actually set the price per year for each of the councils or local government organisations. And we've offered a 1-year price, a 3-year price and a 5-year price for that, with a three-year price having a 5% discount and a 5-year price having a 10% discount on to that as well. So this is all just public available information on how many residents aligned to that specific council or public authority. Next one on here as well, we also have one about UEBA licensing. So UEBA is actually a separate license from the core SIEM. And this can be very, very powerful, as hopefully you saw inside the presentation. The starting license for that is 250 entities, which works out around about £6,000 or exactly £6,000 per year. And obviously that can scale out across your environments as you see fit as well, with 250 usually being enough to cover the high risk users, so your administrators, senior management and your core servers as well. Are we working with NCSC at all? In particular, we're looking to carry out their LME tool and a plan to take part in the CTI pilots. I think this is probably one for Nils.
Yes, so yes, we are working with the NCSC. I've had a handful of phone calls a month ago, something like that. We've had a bit of a demo session where I showed them on how we raise our alerts, and they are looking at both providing their own tool as well as allowing people to integrate with SIEMs. Due to current circumstances, that's gone a bit quiet, but I've made a LogPoint image available for them so that they can try this out. So we're very much hoping that we will be part of that story. You're using some terms there that I'm not sure whether they have told me them LME tool and CTI, but I assume that was the same thing that we were talking about. So if there are specific things that you're interested in or that you'd like them to take into account, and let us and them know, and we have channels of communication.
Brilliant, thank you, Nils. And I think that's it for the questions for now, and I think that's it for time as well. I think they're dead on the hour. So I'd just like to say thank you to Robin and to Nils for your time today. And hopefully everyone found that really useful. On the screen at the moment, you can see my email address along with the UK email address as well. So please do reach out. If there's anything else we can assist with, any more information you need, please let us know and we'll happily provide that, obviously. And thank you for your time today.